Well, thank you very much indeed, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you this evening, and I think it's quite atmospheric with all of the rain cooping down at the same time. So, well, thank you to the APPG, to Transparency International UK, to the Royal United Services Institute, and to the Spotlight and Corruption for hosting this event, and most importantly, the kind invitation for me to address you this evening. I am genuinely really grateful for all of the work that all of your groups continue to undertake in raising the profile of the fight that we're all engaged in against illicit finance. I know from my valuable and insightful meetings with colleagues and Margaret Hodge and Kevin Hollenrake and others that are constantly coming in to see me of more suggestions of extra things that we can be doing. We are all committed to this task. And we can all agree that economic crime is a significant and it's a serious problem in the UK. It threatens our national security, our prosperity, and our global influence. The social and economic cost of economic crime to the UK is estimated at something like £8.4 billion per year. Now, because the UK has one of the most largest and most open economies, it makes it an attractive place for us to do legitimate business, and that is a good thing. But sadly, it also exposes us to economic crime, such as money laundering, corruption, and the financing of organised crime and terrorism. And that's why we've already taken some unprecedented action to stop kleptocrats and criminals, to increase the transparency around the ownership and control of UK corporate structures, and to help prevent the misuse of those same UK corporate structures. It was Rahm Emanuel, I think, who said, never waste a good crisis. And following Putin's terrible, unconscionable invasion of Ukraine, that gave us a great opportunity to crack down on dirty money in the UK by passing the Economic Crime Transparency and Enforcement Act earlier in this year. And I know, again, several colleagues here played a key role in supporting the government, shaping that act, and I am extremely grateful to them. You'll be aware that that created the new register of overseas entities, requiring overseas companies owning or buying property in the UK to give information about their beneficial ownership to Companies House. The register was successfully launched on the 1st of August, and it's already rolling out well. I don't know what the latest figures are. Several thousand have now registered. They've got until February next year for the 6-month period for all existing overseas entities that own any property, land in the UK to get themselves on the public register, which is available, searchable to all members of the public and, of course, law enforcement. And they will have to register who the beneficial owner of that particular property is. We are proud to be one of the first G20 countries to actually establish a public register of domestic company beneficial ownership way back in 2016. We want to improve access to the companies register, including we started making it free to search in 2015, and that has resulted in something like 12 billion free data requests this year in 2020-21. But of course, however much we've done, we always recognise that there is more that we can do to strengthen the UK's corporate environment to help to drive out dirty money. Well, the rain has stopped now for some reason. I must have said something to upset somebody. So last month, those again who were involved in the process will know that we introduced into Parliament the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill. I wanted to call it Econ Crime 2, but apparently we weren't allowed to do that by the Public Bill Office. And this bill will again bear down on the kleptocrats, the criminals and the terrorists, strengthening the UK's reputation as a place where legitimate business can thrive while driving dirty money out of the UK. The bill contains essential reforms of Companies House, and they are the most significant reforms to the UK's framework for registering companies in something like 170 years. They will fundamentally change Companies House and include introducing identity verification for all new and importantly existing directors, all beneficial owners, and those who file information with Companies House. Companies House will go from being a dumb register which just accepts information given to it to one that has the powers to actively check and ensure that the information that's provided to it is sensible, reasonable, and the people who are who they say they are. It will at least massively cut down on my post bag from MPs writing to me saying, how come Mickey Mouse has been registered as a company director at one of my constituents' addresses? What are you going to do about it? And the answer is this bill will hopefully prevent that, including Vladimir Putin, who I think has been registered a number of times as a director of various businesses as well in the UK. And this will help ensure that we know the real people acting for and benefiting from companies. Verification will be done either with Companies House directly or through an authorised corporate service provider. The bill contains measures to prevent the abuse of limited partnerships, tightening registration requirements and increasing transparency. It creates also, from a Home Office point of view, additional powers to seize crypto assets more quickly and easily. It will enable more effective and targeted information sharing to tackle money laundering and economic crime, and it provides new intelligence gathering powers for law enforcement and helps to remove some of the regulatory burdens on business. So this is a really significant, comprehensive package in the bill, and it will ensure that law enforcement and the private sector have significant new tools needed to help tackle dirty money in this country. It will deliver greater protection for members of the public and businesses. Delivering this change, of course, is a big job, and it will mean significant change within Companies House itself. And in recognition of the challenge, the government has already allocated £63 million across the spending review period for Companies House to implement what will be a transformation programme to bring on board all of these reforms, hopefully, of course, when Parliament has passed the legislation. But this is not a task that government and law enforcement can or should take on alone. And for that reason, we are grateful for the partnerships that we've formed with many colleagues that are here today within both the private, public sectors and civil societies. So I really look forward to continuing to work in concert with all of you who are active on this agenda as the bill passes through Parliament. It's in the House of Commons at the moment. It will eventually come to the House of Lords. But throughout its parliamentary passage and beyond, we want to continue to work with you all to help to take these reforms forward, to implement them and establish that the UK is a place for clean business, and we want to drive out the dirty money, the corrupt money from UK business. Thank you all very much indeed for all the work you do in this space. It's a pleasure to work with you.
I'm going to start by saying big thank you to Martin for coming this evening, and also I hope that we're unique really at a time when Parliament has somewhat lost its reputation. We've had a little bit of chaos over the last few weeks. We are a unique example actually of Parliament at its best, because we are a coalition of backbench members of Parliament from right across the spectrum, literally right across the spectrum in both parties. I think Kevin will agree with me. And we've brought people together, working very closely with the NGO sector, to have a common ambition for what we seek to do over the coming period. So there are things to celebrate at the moment, even if you're feeling a little bit, what on earth is happening here at the heart of our democracy. I want to thank Transparency International UK, Spotlight, I haven't seen them, I'm sure Sue's, there we are, they're here, and RUSI for co-funding this with the two all-party groups. And it's great to see you all. We met last in the tranquility of Westminster Abbey 6 months ago, and I don't think any of us really saw at that point how chaotic it would be to get to the point where we are today to consider the bill. Tomorrow we're starting the process of considering the bill in the House of Commons, and this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, which is why we're all putting our heart and soul into it, to try and really turn around the tanker that has created the situation where Britain has become a jurisdiction of choice for too much dirty money across the world. It's a big problem, as you said. I always use the statistic of £290 billion, which is the best guesstimate, I'm sure it's much greater, of the amount that costs, and that's between a quarter to a third of total public expenditure, and that's the annual loss to the UK economy of economic crime. And it's got a human cost too. We always think about these big crazy figures that we can't put our heads around, but it's the human cost, whether it's around people trafficking that results in it, drug smuggling, terrorism, or money laundering, all sorts of economic crime. And if you look at fraud, which is a big component, that has really reached epidemic levels now. 40% of total crime, and 1 in 11 adults is likely to be a victim of fraud, and that's only where the fraud is reported. So the real figure is bound to be bigger. And all this is happening at a time when war rages in Ukraine, and that has brought into focus, really, the role that Putin's people have played with the money that they have stolen from the Russian people in funding the war and in facilitating the aggression of Russia. And, you know, I often reflect that it's sad that it took that war for us to focus, but we need to grasp that opportunity to try and put Britain back on the right road to being a trusted jurisdiction where people will choose to put their money and where people have faith in the honesty of the jurisdiction. That's how we'll grow the financial services sector. We'll never grow it on the back of dirty money. So I do welcome the bill. I'm doing something I haven't done for 20 years, which is go and sit on the committee of the bill. I used to do it as a minister, and then it was something that I decided I'd had enough of that. But this is so important that I am going to be a member of the committee on the bill. And I hope that the government will look kindly on some of the amendments that we put forward, because we were already developing some. There are some which are just technical, which I hope that we can agree will improve it. And on Companies House reform, we want to make sure that there aren't any loopholes in the new legislation that we create. We want to ensure that those tasked with providing the data are properly regulated and properly supervised. And we want to make sure that Companies House, despite that initial injection of money, is properly funded from its own resources so that it can carry out the task we give it. I often give this statistic. It costs £12 to establish a company in the UK today, and we want to open Britain to business. We want to make ourselves an open economy in that way, one that welcomes business formation, but put that alongside how much it costs to get a worker's visa. It costs £1,220 to do that, and that is a ridiculous anomaly, and I don't think a small increase in that cost to fund Companies House effectively would in any way stop legitimate businesses from funding themselves here. So the first thing is around making sure that's right. We want to, and I know Kevin feels passionately about this, we want to introduce a failure to prevent economic crime on those directors and companies who support it, the people that we call particularly the enablers, whether they're working in the accountancy, so it might be some of you here, banking, or in the legal or other advice things. And we think, Kevin talks about this very articulately, but we think this isn't to lock people up. It's to prevent crimes happening. It's to prevent money. It's the most effective and powerful preventative tool that we can think of. So we're very keen on that. We want to toughen up on the enforcement. It's no good us passing lots of legislation and it not being used. And I think that means making sure that the enforcement agencies are well and properly funded. It's making sure that the agencies provide proper supervision to those working in the financial services sector so the bad apples are eliminated and taken out of the system. And it's making sure that everybody is properly accountable to you through Parliament. And I think those are important things. And we want to also see, I've just picked out 4 issues, but we want to also see whether we can pass legislation in a tough area, but at the moment we freeze the assets of people, but we don't seize them. And we want to look at the examples that exist in jurisdictions like Italy, where they've had to deal with a mafia for decades, or in jurisdictions like Canada, where they're a little bit ahead of the game, or America, where they're looking at this, where the people who've been sanctioned will have their assets seized as well as frozen, and for us, so that that can be repurposed to help in the reconstruction of Ukraine after the war is over. So I look forward to endless days and nights over the coming month on the bill. I then look forward to coming back to this house and going to your house, Martin, hopefully before Christmas. And I just look forward to us working together at our best in Parliament to create a situation where our financial services sector can really prosper and grow and become the driver of growth, jobs and prosperity that we want without depending on dirty money. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Heather, and on behalf of all the partners in the UK Anti-Corruption Coalition and our illicit finance working group, my thanks to all of you here tonight for your interest and your support in tackling economic crime. For more than 20 years, businesses have been our first line of defence against dirty money. So it is vital that the private sector has the tools and the information they need shared, and regulators and law enforcement have the resources and capacity they need if we are to mount an effective partnership together against economic crime. As RUSI's Transatlantic Task Force on Illicit Finance has concluded, both the United States and the United Kingdom need to be honest about their own vulnerabilities and audit the toolbox available to them in tackling illicit finance. Last week at Chatham House, I was talking with businesses about Russia sanctions. Now, these weren't huge corporates and they weren't part of the regulated financial sector. And I heard them explain how hard they found it to know who really was behind the companies that make up their own clients. You see, the now widely discredited World Bank Ease of Doing Business rankings really were measuring the wrong thing. How much it costs and how long it takes to register a new company doesn't determine the ease of doing business. Having confidence that your potential suppliers, investors, and yes, customers are indeed who they say they are matters much more to the work of actually doing business. That's why the customers of the company registrar at Companies House aren't so much the companies that file the required information, but the very many business people every day who use the information published on the register to support due diligence in the course of their business. We need to appreciate the company register as part of our country's information infrastructure that helps people do business here with confidence. The problem is that very little of the information published is checked for accuracy first. I expect we'll hear from UK Finance later how in its current form the banks, with their very substantial anti-money laundering responsibilities, simply can't rely on this information. And they spend a lot of money on alternatives. That's money which small businesses simply can't afford. So addressing the weaknesses of our company register, as intended by the bill that's now before members of Parliament, will, dare I say, level up access to quality information so that everyone doing business in Britain can have confidence that they know who they are doing business with. That's why it's critical that we get these reforms right now and don't put off difficult questions to later. There's a very real risk that in improving oversight of limited companies, we make it even more attractive to abuse other company structures such as limited liability partnerships. Transparency International just last week published a report, Partners in Crime, where one of my colleagues, Ben Cowder, give us a wave, Ben, trawled through thousands upon thousands of limited liability partnerships that have been registered in this country and found them to have corporate partners that were the corporate partners of limited liability partnerships that appeared in the Danske Bank scandal, the Azerbaijani laundromat, and countless other major money laundering schemes. Now, none of these reforms will matter if the resources aren't there to implement them well, and if there simply isn't the capacity to enforce the laws made here in Parliament. A recent report from Spotlight on Corruption highlighted that the UK spends the equivalent of just 0.042% of GDP on national level economic crime enforcement bodies, despite the fact that, as you've heard, economic crime is estimated to cost the UK hundreds of times more than that. So we have many colleagues and partners here tonight who are on hand to help you with the thorny details of these issues. So please do speak to them over drinks, whether about how to get Companies House reform right, the importance of resources for enforcement, or the challenges of raising the quality of anti-money laundering supervision. These are all essential parts of the response to economic crime. And it really is time that we fought this economic crime campaign like we mean to win.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, particularly talking about collaboration. I think it's a nice experience to have all my best lines stolen by Duncan. That means we're all facing in the right direction. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about collaboration, what we can do and what we are currently struggling to do. So economic crime is a problem, and it's a problem that the financial sector takes very seriously indeed. We've called the levels of fraud currently a national security crisis. I think we've heard about the response to the Russian invasion, how important that is, and taken in the round, it is an important challenge, because if we don't win the challenge against illicit finance, there's a lot at stake. There's the UK as an innovative and open society. So it's very important that we work together on it. Now, in terms of where we are at the moment, we know we can collaborate. We've collaborated for the last 3 years with the government, with law enforcement, with regulators and with civil society under the Economic Crime Plan aegis. That has included intelligence sharing through the Joint Money Laundering Intelligence Task Force, including Transparency International and some others in that work. We've also worked on a cross-sector basis with the telecoms industry, with the crypto sector even. And the key thing we found is you need to work hard at it. It is not easy. You have to come at it with different incentives and different requirements, but you can do it. And 3 years on, we now have some good news. I'm going to get into the good news, but I do want to strike a note of caution. I think it is the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. In terms of the other points I'd like to raise, the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill is pointing in the right direction. It is a great start. It will definitely bring the UK back in line with international good practice. But I use that term advisedly. It's good practice. It is not best practice. It is not the best we can do, especially not the UK working together in collaboration. So with that note of caution, the good news. We have, after 3 years, finally come up with a bill that is delivering a lot of the key priorities from our partnership work. Information sharing, corporate transparency, and powers for law enforcement to actually go after new forms of digitalised crime, including on crypto asset abuse. So that's great. We've also got some international leadership. The UK's G7 presidency pushed, you may have noticed, quite hard for beneficial ownership reform that actually resulted in a result internationally. The Financial Action Task Force didn't just update their standards in March this year, they've also agreed a new consultation on updating the standards for trusts and legal arrangements, including limited partnerships. And there'll also be some guidance on what best practice looks like for Companies House and other corporate registries. So that's great. We've also got Switzerland. I'll repeat that. Switzerland actually reforming its beneficial ownership registry. You've also got the US moving to establish it, and the UK hopefully all moving in line with this new best practice guidance. And of course, let's look a little bit closer to home. We finally have a consultation on the statutory code for authorised push payment reimbursement, which will drive consistency across the industry. And last but not least, by any means, we finally got the beginning of the end on fraud in the payments journey. UK finance statistics for the first half of this year are showing a 13% reduction, which is great, not cause for complacency, but it's showing all this work can have an effect if it's only the beginning. So here's the but. Now the but is we have a bill that goes in the right direction but not far enough. And with great respect to Bayes and Companies House, they have unfortunately demonstrated what you can do with extra legal powers. So they've whetted our appetite. We've done a lot of work with them in terms of data enrichment and bulk data sharing around Bibbles fraud, allowing the private sector access to information they did not have, allowing them to scope their reviews. Far better results in terms of conversion rate from red flags into real investigations and real support for asset recovery. So we want more, obviously. But we don't want it just for ourselves. We want this to be available to the entire regulated sector and, on a legitimate basis, to the civil society investigators that do so much work bringing problems to light. There are also issues about verification. Verification of identity, it's great. It'd be good to know whether it is Mickey Mouse or Beyonce behind the company. But we still need to know whether or not it is Companies House that is verifying things. Are we actually going to find out whether they are the director, whether they are the beneficial owner? At the moment, that's not in the bill. The order-making powers prohibit Companies House from being able to be given those powers to verify. That falls short of minimum industry standards. It's an art to the possible here. There is not an easy way to do it, but the regulated sector somehow manages to do it, and they do it on reasonable grounds. They find a reasonable way to be assured that they are reasonably confident. That, I think, gives more than enough wiggle room for the government and Companies House to find a way to do something to actually verify, are you a beneficial owner? Equally, the trust company service provider sector, while it is getting increased improvement, it has been a problem child in the regulated sector. There have been studies, we did it jointly with the GIMLET bodies and the National Crime Agency, into particular problems in the TCSP sector, as it's called. And those problems led to remediation, but that remediation is ongoing. It behooves Companies House in their powers of reliance on verification by a third sector to check it knows what it's relying on. And again, there's a way around this, and we would be more than happy to help Companies House take on some of the work we've done in the regulated sector, but there's a lot of good reg techs in there that are going to be desperate to help them do this properly. So anyway, on to the second bit of the bad news. The bad news is if we do get the legislation we want, and we get the powers we need, and we get the security we all deserve, we've then got the challenge of really collaborating. And to really collaborate, we can't just look at whether or not we're compliant. We can't just look about whether we're managing the risks in our own sector. We need to work out whether the people are doing what they're best at the right time. Whether the public sector are managing risks first time at incorporation of companies, whether the private sector is doing the best to help identify anomalies that are material to risk, or whether it's just spelling mistakes, and whether we are all together passing intelligence that we need to law enforcement that is properly resourced to actually go after and disrupt these criminal gangs. That's going to be very difficult. At the moment, the regulatory regime incentivizes people to mind their own garden, and I'm afraid we've all gone a long way past that in the regulated sector. We've had to. We have a national security crisis in fraud, and we have to respond to the threat, again, a national security threat from hostile states. So I'm very glad to be here. I'm very glad to be here on a collaboration platform, but I do think it's worth us looking forward to next year, where hopefully we can look at even more difficult problems. Thank you very much.
Can I just say, even though Margaret's not here, what an absolute... I can say anything I want, I suppose, but what a pleasure it is to work with Margaret. What a wonderful job she has done in this space. And people like me are actually just standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of trying to get this kind of stuff over the line. It really is a wonderful thing she has done, and such an important topic. And even when although she's not here, I think we should give her a round of applause. She is here! Yay! Wonderful. It will be a very, very sad day when Margaret decides to retire from this job, but it really will. You've done a wonderful job, Margaret. But I am trying to console myself by putting a bid in for her office, which is one of the best in Parliament. So, listen, not every day is a good day in politics, as you've probably noticed, but today is a very good day. Can I just say? It turns out in September we weren't quite ready for Rishi, but we are now ready for Rishi. He's going to be a brilliant Prime Minister, and he's lifted the mood around here already, so I hope you're as excited about the future as we are, not just in terms of politics, but the wider economy. So can I just slay, I'm going to speak very briefly, but I want to slay a couple of myths in this whole space. Number one, that economic crime is somehow a white-collar, victimless crime. And number two, that tackling economic crime is bad for business. And on the first one, victimless crime, you should try and speak to a couple of the families of a couple of constituents of mine. Leah Hayes, a teenager who died in a car park in Northallerton, having taken an ecstasy tablet for the first time and died, her reaction to that. And the family of Andrew Bellaby, who his life was destroyed by a life on drugs, and eventually committed suicide in his mid-30s. And talked to the families about whether they are victims of crimes or not. Terrible. And we deal with this stuff all the time as parliamentarians. But we tackle the symptoms of this stuff, but we rarely tackle the cause itself. And what's the connection between that, of course, and this issue? Well, HSBC were fine. I'm sorry if there's any from HSBC here. I'm actually having dinner with them tomorrow night, so I apologise in advance. But they were fined $1.9 billion in 2012 for laundering money for the El Chapo's drug cartel. Just absolutely outrageous. And yet it's a fine. That's all it is. Nobody goes to jail. So unless we start tackling this at source and really clamping down on this, then these victimless crimes supposedly will keep happening. And the other thing, it's bad for business. If it's bad for nobody really believes this is bad for business. Who wants to deal with dirty money anyway? If it's dirty money, I don't want it in this country. It can go somewhere else. It's not any. The best advert for whether it's not bad for business, in other words, it's good for business. Jersey, which isn't probably known as probably the cleanest place in the world in terms of money, but they've just introduced an offence of failure to prevent. Exactly what Margaret was saying earlier. So if it's bad for business, why would a jurisdiction like Jersey introduce something that could really move the dial on this? And a failure to prevent offence is quite simple. What it means for the first time is you don't have to prove the bank or the lawyer or the accountant was directly implicated in money laundering, for example. You just have to prove they didn't try and prevent it, that they willfully ignored it, that kind of stuff. And our enforcement agencies want it. SFO, CPS, the NCA all want it. That's what we need. Margaret and I are going to, and I do actually, I'm not particularly envious of Dean Russell, the excellent minister who's on the bill committee that you're going to make his life a nightmare for a few weeks, Margaret, talking about this stuff. But I do hope the government will accept that we should have a failure to prevent offence in the economic crime bill, because it would be revolutionary. How many times have we heard people like Mark Carney, people like Gordon Brown, people like Andrew Bailey say people should have gone to jail for what had happened in the credit crunch, in the financial crisis? How many times have we said that? Well, why don't we introduce some laws where we can put these people in jail for doing the wrong thing, but particularly when this kind of the facilitation of dirty money. And so the failure to prevent offence makes it easier to hold a bank to account and an individual within that bank to account. We introduced something very similar in health and safety law in 1974 in the construction sector, where actually if you didn't try to prevent an accident at work, then you personally would be held responsible as a director. And lo and behold, the following year, deaths and serious injuries dropped by 90% on construction sites. That's the kind of focus this would bring forward. It's no longer just a cost of doing business to get to transgress these laws. It's actually you personally held responsible. It's absolutely essential. We'll push it as far as we can, both in this house, in our house, and in the other house. And the other thing is whistleblowing. You know, of all the cases we've dealt with in the all-party groups, every single case that's come to light has come to light because of a whistleblower who's brought this information forward. It's very rare the enforcement agencies go in and find this stuff. So, and we've got a whistleblower here tonight. He's my constituent, actually, Ian Foxley. There he is. Put your hand up, Ian. Round of applause. Ian blew the whistle on GPT Special Projects, which was a government-connected organisation, actually, MOD-connected organisation. They were doing bribery. They were involved in bribery in military contracts with the Saudis. Ian very bravely blew the whistle on that in 2010, 11. He was saying he was in a very well-paid job at the time, and once you've blown the whistle in these kind of instances, you don't get a job anywhere else ever again. So Ian's been out of work now, I hope you know what I'm saying. He's done lots of good work, but in terms of being paid work, out of work for 11 years, it probably cost him in the region, if you add it all up, an interest. I won't embarrass him, but it's millions. It cost him. GPT Special Projects were actually fined in Southwark Crown Court in 2021, sanctions of 28 million quid, which all drops into the Treasury. Ian gets nothing. He wasn't protected, he wasn't compensated. It's absolutely outrageous that we would do that. And Ian's not the only person. So I believe if we get these two things right, failure to prevent and whistleblower protection and compensation, we will tackle 90% of the dirty money that's come into the UK. It's great work, it's great to be involved with it. Thank you so much for your support and for your attendance. You'll know the fight will continue. Thank you.